Man, if you thought we were done with NPM related events, boy, were you wrong. Over the last 3 weeks, might actually be 2 weeks, really, we've had three major events. We'll talk about each of them, but it started off kind of with that Singularity hit, then into some package maintainers being phished, or a package maintainer being phished, and kind of culminating in what we've been learning this week about the Shai-Hulud event, which is kind of our first instantiation of worm-like behavior in this arena. So stick around and hear more about these events.
Attackers know identity is the weakest link. Permiso knows how to protect those identities better than anyone else.
All right. Now, if you're like me, you're probably having a hard time keeping track of all of these. So let's kind of start off at a high level and then get into each of these in a bit more detail. But kind of first at the high level, I'll talk about the original event, which occurred August 24th, is at least the earliest evidence related to this event. And that's the event we kind of hear about called as Singularity, or the NX related event. And in this one, what we have is an attacker was able to do some token theft via GitHub Actions, taking advantage of the ability to kind of write data into the title of a PR. And once they were able to get a hold of a token, use that token to publish multiple malicious updates to various packages. Now, if we take a peek at the timeline here, you'll notice that, hey, man, people are catching on quick. So a day after, GitHub is already disabling repos, and they're trying to disable repos as they're popping in. And as fast as this is being caught, still devastating how much activity is occurring. So what was the malicious code doing in this Singularity NX one? Well, if you had one of the vulnerable versions of that package, it would run a file, telemetry.js, on your system that would do some credential harvesting. Essentially, that was like the main purpose of it, do a bunch of credential harvesting, and then upload the results of that credential harvesting to GitHub in public view. Just create a repo from your own personal GitHub name with a file in it, and that is a triple base64 encoded file of your credentials. The repos all being named Singularity. The naming of it actually makes it really easy to kind of track a whole bunch of this, and I'll show you a little bit of that here in a moment. Now, the attacker gets a whole bunch of creds. Now, what we saw on the Singularity campaign is there's actually kind of like two phases to it, right? You have your first phase is anybody who ran that vulnerable package, their creds being pushed up into the public, and the attacker, or really anybody, could then go grab those creds while they're active, at least until GitHub was disabling them, and they would disable them pretty quick. So as new ones were popping up, it wasn't very long before GitHub was removing access to those. So that's phase one. Now, the attacker, presumably here, gained a whole bunch of credentials during this attack. And that's where kind of phase two comes in. What does the attacker do with those creds? Well, one of the things that they do in phase two here is actually go back into the repos they now had access to, if they still had access to them, and anything that was private in those repos, any private repositories in those user accounts they had access to in GitHub, they would just then make them public. Now, these are fully viewable to anybody who would be looking at them. So any private repos now flipped to public. So just kind of overview again. So initial vector on this one is GitHub Actions writing some token data to a pull request via a pull request writing to a title, delivering into a whole bunch of packages, some malicious code under the label telemetry.js, which would then do some cred harvesting and then dump those creds into public repos, following the naming standard you see in front of you here, Singularity repository there. And then phase two of it being mass repo exposure, just sending any private repo to public for the affected users where they had creds. Now, let's take a quick tangent to September 8th and 9th, where a maintainer, a package maintainer, was phished, and then 18 to 20-ish packages related to this maintainer were updated with malicious code. Now, unlike the previous one, right? The Singularity, it was all about getting more creds and exposing those creds. This was crypto wallet drainer related. And at least as far as anyone's talked about so far, I don't think there's any linkage between the September 8th and 9th activity and the Singularity. But there is a linkage to kind of the main event that I want to talk about from Singularity going over into the Shai-Hulud activity. And hopefully people you'll catch that reference, right? Obviously, this is a worm. What's the biggest worm? There you go. Dad jokes, even in malware delivery. But what we see in Singularity, some of the creds taken in that Singularity event may have been the creds that were used to instantiate the activity that started happening on September 14th. Now, that's being there are a few researchers out there, maybe most notably Wiz is talking about that connection. So I would say this is not high confidence, but there is at least some chance here that the actors involved in the Singularity a Singularity event are the same actors involved here. And there are actually some overlaps in the code that's being leveraged in these as well, which I'll show, although I will say they're pretty circumstantial on that side. So what happens here? Well, September 14th is when we get the first evidence of any worm package activity. It was one particular package that seemed to be affected first. On the 15th, kind of like the world wakes up to this happening, at least a little bit more. The scale and the scope widens quite a bit. And you're starting to see some analysis come out around what, in this case, instead of telemetry.js, it's a bundle.js file that's being where all the malicious code is. And the 16th and kind of going on with the worm doing worm things, though with less success, mainly because some of the attacker infrastructure related to this ran out of hit some rate limits, or maybe some of the folks involved helped them hit their rate limit. But let's talk about at a high level what's going on here, and a little bit about what is different and the same we'll get into as well. So first, in this case, the delivery of this is a Trojanized package update, right? And what makes this so special is this propagation side. So any NPM tokens that are found as this malware runs, that bundle.js runs, it's going to use that NPM token to try to propagate to other packages, and essentially widening out the number of packages that are affected, and hopefully widening out, or at least from the attacker's perspective, the number of victims that they're hitting. That is the worm aspect of this, of the self-propagation through NPM tokens that they're taking. Other things that the bundle.js does, running truffle hog on doing essentially secret scraping from various places. I'll call it IMDS here as well, because I know a lot of people maybe aren't as familiar there. In a cloud world, that is the metadata service, particularly on AWS side, and your creds for anything running in AWS. If you have an EC2 instance, for instance, running in AWS, it will use that metadata service to know what its session token is and things like that, right? So it's trying to scan for more credentials, even in cloud resources, not just in various output. And like in the last one, what's it do with these creds when it has? It sends them up to GitHub and throws it into a repo with our fun name here. And oddly enough, and one of the commonalities I'll end up talking about later, triple base 64 encodes the output. Again, coincidental, but interesting to see like some overlaps like that between these. So pretty interesting what's going on like at a high level here. Let's actually dive a little bit more into some of the things that are interesting about the individual malicious code from these two events. So I'm actually going to go back over here to telemetry.js, which was associated with the Singularity campaign. And one of the things I haven't seen talked about much is there were various versions of this going out as the attacker was modifying it throughout the event. And at least I found 3 versions of it. And what was changing between those 3 is the prompt aspect of it. I don't think I mentioned it, but one of the things that the telemetry.js, the Singularity event one did, is it would try to use any local LM CLIs that you had running to go and find more creds itself. And this is the prompt it was using to do that. And you'll see like, hey, this changes over time. Some of the earlier versions seem to be very crypto and like wallet focused things, whereas the more later versions seem to be more credential focused. Just it was interesting to see the evolution of that prompt in general. So about a couple weeks ago, on LinkedIn, I threw a couple of things that I thought was just interesting about what I was seeing in the Tomerty.js file. So we covered one already. That is the prompts changing in the various versions that I was finding. The second one, obviously, is like, hey, they're leveraging CLI LLMs against you if you have them installed. Kind of interesting. I don't know how effective that was, but it was cool to see. And it was also interesting to see which ones they went after, right? So Claude, Gemini, and Q. And many of you are probably like, what the hell is Q? That's like, I didn't realize anybody actually used this. This is like AWS's version. Yeah. So it'll go crawl your file system and with that prompt that I was showing before. Another interesting thing, OS targeting, if you're on Windows, just stops and moves on. It was focusing only on Linux and Mac. Don't really know why, but interesting to see. And then target data here, again, mostly related to grabbing more credentials, getting as many credentials as possible. And in a couple of versions, some crypto and wallet things, which I guess is mandatory at this time too. All right, so that's our Singularity side. Let's scroll over here to our other, right, my scroll wheels, the Shai-Hulud side. All right, we have bundle.js, and I just kind of carved out a couple pieces of the malicious code in here. This is not everything that it does, but here are a few things. And I'll kind of walk through like some of the high level things here in a moment, but just to give you a chance to look and get an understanding of what this was doing. In here, you'll see when they are using the GitHub workflows, the GitHub Actions stuff, what is the configuration, right? Run command here is using a webhook.site. This is where there's some rate limiting involved. It seemed like either they're on the free tier or somebody over on this infrastructure side had limited them themselves. But it seems to have somewhat been a deterrent there. You can get an idea also for like grabbing Truffle Hog and what data they were going for. And when we looked at the data that they're going after, really apparent which specific areas they wanted credentials from, right? So GitHub credentials, AWS, GCP, anything that could scrape with Truffle Hog, and then NPM. And that NPM one is where we see the propagation. So let's see what I highlighted down here. So GitHub Actions workflow here for that injection and a little bit of data theft stuff. Secrets harvesting with Truffle Hog, we've already talked about that. Hey, and then the base64 3 times with the data theft that they were sending. So when we start looking at between these two of these, what do they have in common? A couple of things that I thought was interesting here is both avoiding Windows. And again, these are circumstantial links in general, but both avoid Windows, both triple base 64 their output and toss them into public repos. They also had some very similar things about the way they were putting in host headers and a couple of other things like that. All very circumstantial, but very interesting things to see. And while I'll say they both did these things, the way they avoided Windows, for instance, is different between the two malware packages. One is looking for anything, specifically looking for Linux and Mac. And the other one is saying like, hey, if you're Windows, exit. Just two different ways of going after that same thing. So let's talk a little bit about the scale side of this house. So let's go over here. Cool. So on the scale side of the house, let's first talk about the credential scale. So we talk about the Singularity event. And I guess for anybody who wants to do some of this research on their own, there are many places that allow you to query the public events associated with GitHub. ClickHouse is one of those. There are other ones out there. GitHub Archive themselves allow you to download going back years any public event stream from GitHub. You can learn a lot from those. But anyways, this is me running a query looking for anytime there's a create event and the repo name is Singularity repository to see if to see like what are the affected repositories. And you can see here, there's a couple of different naming standards. If you see 0, 1, or even, well, actually, I don't think the 2 is a legit one. Some people are trying to like make repos just to get researchers to come there and see what they have. Uh, I don't think 2 is a legit one that I've seen, but 0, 1 are normally the repos that are being created with the creds available in them, where you see the 5-character string versions. So Singularity repo dash, in this case, CVAIX. That is when a private repo was being switched to public. Or at least in the ones that I've looked at. So pretty interesting to see. And then even here, like we're looking at dates, some of this is still happening now. And you're only going to get, I think you only get 1,000 rows here in QuickHouse, but you can download this full data set and harvest through it yourself. One of the things that I did when this was originally going on was, hey, you'll notice that in GitHub, like this is the GitHub user that's affected, and then a repo being created in that user's activity. This isn't like in a org level repo where this is occurring. So what this means, if you want to see if like your org was affected, effectively, you would kind of need to go to your GitHub org and see who are the members of your GitHub org and grab all those usernames and then go check for those usernames plus Singularity or, whatever your query happens to be, to see if any of your people are affected or if any of your clients are affected if you're somebody who's doing some managed services for others. That's one way you could go about checking for this. And that actually works same in the Shai-Hulud case as well. All right. So when we look at the credential side, this was very successful on the Singularity side. Whereas if we take a peek on the Shai-Hulud side, very much not as successful on at least the credential portion, right? 78 rows versus can't even show as many because it's over 1,000 on the other side. Right. And you can see the folks that are affected here. So what am I looking at here? We're looking at these are where credentials that were harvested from the malicious packages running are being pushed to and are being sent to these repos. So go to QuickHouse and start searching around to see if you can find a little bit more of this. Now, when we talk about packages wise, the scale and scope, that's where the story changes a little bit. While a data theft Singularity was more effective, on the other side, this worm was way more effective at affecting more NPM packages. I think we're over 500 affected packages at this point, with some ironic ones in there. I won't poke too much fun at them because I still got a lot of friends over there. But CrowdStrike, being in that funny and ironic to see them show up in the mix of packages that were affected. Now, some interesting takeaways I really want to get to here that maybe aren't very apparent initially to most people. One is like, hey, who are the people that are being affected by this right now? The people that are being affected by this are your folks who are trying to update their packages often, maybe have auto update done. I'll throw in the vibe coders as well, right? Like these are folks that maybe don't even know what packages they have, right? They're just auto importing the things that they think they need. Right. So who are the people that are getting these? The people who are using the latest packages. Now, there are some configuration settings that you could do to wait a few days, right? Like maybe you don't need the package the day that it's updated. You can set a minimum package age to say like, hey, I only want things that have been around for 14 days, for 30 days, whatever that happens to be for your risk appetite. Now, I know this is counterintuitive because a lot of times you're told like, hey, patch right away. Whatever's going on, make sure you're patching right away. Well, the people who patch right away are the people that were hit here. It's particularly the people who are auto updating. Like these things are caught within a couple of days with how many eyes are on them at this time. So if you just wait a little bit, you're going to be in a safer spot. Inevitably, the conversation comes up like, do we need all these dependencies? I think if you go listen to the influencers in that dev space, the folks like Theo and the like, they're advocating for like, hey, we've gone a little too far. We don't need a package for everything. You might not realize the danger of bringing in a package, maybe a package that is also reliant on other packages as well. Another one that I think is super interesting to bring up, and it's really apparent not in just these supply chain attacks, but also in these sales loft stuff, which I did a podcast on last week. You should definitely watch that. In the sales loft one, what we found was, man, an attacker who has access to 700 organizations, more than 700 organizations, sensitive data, that is, a wealth of information that is considered pretty sensitive, pretty confidential. What did the attacker want? They wanted to export case files and scrape those for more credentials. Credentials are king right now. And these campaigns also, what are they going after? Yeah, we had a few crypto and wallet things going on, but generally speaking, it's been all about gaining more credentials, getting more sprawl. And this worm itself doesn't propagate without access to those credentials. The success of this worm will be on how many credentials it's able to scrape and how many more packages it can affect to continue scraping those. And these creds are now landing in public places where everyone can go see them. Anyone who's paying attention to anybody who's monitoring the GitHub event stream can then go and grab these files as they're landing up there and try to use them. I imagine some of you on the security side are like, hey, honeypot wise, I'm going to throw some credentials up there and see if one of these bad guys can come into my environment where I can monitor them. Great idea. You should definitely do it. Just make sure it's in a controlled environment. What else is important to see here? More of this, right? You're going to get more and more of the success of an attack. And with the clout of an attack like this, you're just going to see more and more of it. You'll have copycats. You may have the same personas, going after similar objectives here. But just overall, when something is successful, you're going to see other people copy it. I think we will see more of these, and I think they're going to get more sophisticated. And I don't think there's nothing happening to stop this, right? That yes, people are awake and watching and knowing that this is occurring, but not a lot of organizations are doing anything about this. And NPM themselves, obviously there's not stuff that they're doing either, and at the ecosystem layer. So I think you're just going to see more and more of this going forward. And then a few things a couple organizations that I've worked with, they're asking questions like, hey, can you tell me what package I'm using? Can you tell me what packages are being used throughout everything? Like, these are questions that people are starting to ask, which really kind of brings in the kind of key things that you should be doing in almost any security space, not just the identity security space where I live in right now, but in any security space, you got to know what you have before you can protect it. You got to inventory things. You have to discover what is the surface area. What is this attack surface that is available to you? So that means you need to know what credentials are sitting in files. You need to know what NPM packages you have are being used by not just your production packages, but in dev, where maybe you give your engineers a little more control. You have to know what packages being used, because when somebody says, hey, who's using tiny color, right, you want to be able to answer that. And you want to know what version they're using and when they last used it. Right. All that matters. So really start, I think organizations, one of the wake up calls coming out of this is really needing to understand your identity landscape, right? What creds are available in all the places. And these are both your human and your non-human credentials. And for folks who aren't familiar, your non-human credentials, these are things like API tokens, long-lived access keys, OAuth keys, anything you intend to use programmatically that is probably in the realm of an NHI. Non-human identity. You need to understand what they are so you can protect them. And beyond that, how they're being leveraged as well. But also for your identities, particularly in dev and engineering, what are the things that are risky for them? What are they doing? Understand your surface area, then proactively work to make that surface area smaller and less impactful. And third part of that is monitoring. You really got to pay attention to what's actually happening in your environments, because no matter what, something's going to get past those first two eventually, and you want to be in a situation where you can monitor it afterwards. All right. So this is a big one. I hope you all got a better understanding of what's been going on in the supply chain side. Next week or next podcast episode here, I hope I could talk about something other than supply chain stuff. I'd really love to talk about some of the Teams phishing stuff that we're seeing in the wild, maybe some updates on what Scatter Spider has been up to in their more recent campaigns. So stick around. We got a lot more to share.